All right, it is May 9, and we've got a fairly light agenda today. This is the Gateway API meeting. We've got an open agenda as always. I saw a question or two in Slack that could probably make it onto this agenda. So if anyone from Slack is wanting to raise questions or comments, please just add those items to the agenda here and we can make sure we discuss them. As always, this is very informal. Please feel free to ask questions. There is no limit to who can talk here. We appreciate any and all feedback, ideas, whatever. If something doesn't make sense, please ask. With that, yeah, let's get started. First off, I am suggesting that we should cancel the next 2 meetings for KubeCon. I'm going to be, I think several of us are going to be in Valencia in a week, all things going well, at least. So with that in mind, I am thinking that, at least for me, I will be jet lagged coming back from KubeCon the next time. I don't know what I'll be doing, but it may be safest just to cancel both. I know for sure that I'd love to meet people in person that are going to be at KubeCon. But since so many of us, or enough of us will be there, I don't know that there'll be enough people here to have a meeting. Is anyone interested in meeting either of those next sessions? I'm happy to let someone else lead a meeting. All right, cool. And I should, a broader note, I often, along with Nick, will lead these meetings and discussions and whatever, but I am not tied to that. If we're always open to other people leading these meetings. There's not much to it. So if you're interested in getting involved and helping out that way, yeah, just ping one of us offline and we'll get you set up.
Yeah, 100% agree. We lead the meetings for purely historical reasons rather than anything else. Yeah,
fully agree. Cool. With that said, let's get into a few things that came up related to conformance recently. I think one of the bigger discussion points came out of a Slack conversation last week. I translated that into a PR. There were a couple points in our API where we had recommended returning 503 status codes and no parts in our API where we recommended returning 404s. What made this confusing is we had conformance tests that required returning 404s. I had an assumption that, oh yeah, well, of course it makes sense to return a 404 here, but we didn't have that in our spec. So this is trying to force that issue and make sure that our spec matches our conformance tests, vice versa. There's been some conversation on this PR. I went into the RFC itself to try and I think really we're trying to decide, does a 503 make sense here? Does a 404 make sense? What really makes sense? I think there's really 2 key scenarios we're discussing here. One is if a route doesn't attach, if a route can attach to a gateway, do we do anything for that? Do we change the status code that's returned? Do we have some kind of indication that, hey, something was trying to serve here, it just didn't work? Or do we just ignore it and say, well, it didn't attach and I'm not doing anything special? And then the second thing is, if you reference a backend reference a backend that either doesn't exist or you don't have access to, again, is that just something we ignore and say, hey, we couldn't find anything? Or is that something we surface as a 50X error code of some kind? My proposal, as you can see from this PR, is that we use a 404, just a generic. I don't know about that. It's not attached. It's not something I know about, so I'm ignoring it.
There was a third case, right, which is if you make a request and there's no applicable rule.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I think that's the base case. Yeah, good point. That's a very good point. So I've been assuming that very base case of, if you don't find a matching route rule, that should be a 404. That's my base assumption around all of this. And then if you take that to the next step of, if a route failed to attach, I think that should be treated the same way as just not finding a matching route rule. And then similarly, if a backend ref can't be found, I think that should be treated the same way too. But each one is a little bit more of a step to take, I think. So open to discussion on that.
Yeah, so I think I wanted to put that comment in there because that's what I remembered us talking about earlier. That it allows like end users, like web clients, people who control the actual client thing, to be able to tell that that everything, what's happening and whether or not that their config is like present or something like that, but is just not working. But the more I think about it, the more I think that Rob is right. You don't want people to be able to enumerate like what possible config is there by finding where the 503s are, and the application developer should be reading like, hey, I got this path was working and now is not, and going back to the Gateway API resources to find out what the status is. That's kind of the flow that we want people to have is, hey, I'm expecting this to be served by my Gateway API and it's not. What's going on here? I better go and look at my Gateway API resources. And then that should be the flow that we want the application developer who owns those resources to have. I think it's helpful to come back to the personas there. There's probably an implied persona, I think, of the end user, the person who's actually using the application, that we don't specify because we don't have any way to interact with them. But I was kind of thinking originally that the 503 was useful because those people could then complain to the application developer why they're 503s. But I think that that's probably reading too much into it now. The more I think about it, so yeah, I would draw my objections. I think I'm fine with this 404s. So, but yeah, I think it was probably good to have discussed this so we could draw out this and have a record of why we're doing 404s and not 503s. Yeah, but over to anyone else who wants to talk about this.
I think the one place that 503s might make sense is if there's if the route's attached successfully, they're bound, they're accepted as valid, but there's not a healthy backend to route to potentially. Is where a 503 might
zero healthy endpoints case.
Yeah. Where it's actually is like there's no healthy server. For the first two cases, yeah, I think it's like the default case of having 404 if no match is found seems fine. The case of if a route is not able to bind to the gateway, if it's rejected for some reason, no configuration should happen. Like it should not be able to like affect or configure anything specific that's different than the default case. That makes a lot of sense to me too.
Yeah, I think it can be difficult because the way that this interacts with inclusion and delegation can be tricky as well, because my experience with Contra has been that it can be difficult to tell between you don't get any config because there's no, like, I see what you're saying. I kind of tend to agree a little bit, but it can be in practice, it can be difficult to tell if it's because there's no endpoints or because the service, like other stuff has happened. I think that's probably a good case to call out though. Rob?
Yeah, I thank you for calling that use case out. I completely missed that. This is and I just want to be clear I'm understanding it correctly, but my understanding is there is a backend, it resolves to a service, but that service has no healthy endpoints. And so if that's the case, that does seem different than a 404 to me. That does seem like it's 503, and that seems like something like we should clearly document, and I have not documented it here.
Yeah, I don't know if we should necessarily state the exact code because some implementations may be different, but that is a classic upstream cannot be found kind of thing.
Yeah, agreed. It may not be a need to spec it, but just like a 5xx error or something like it's not found. It's something's found and there's a internal server error of some sort, or yeah, like you said, like the upstream not found.
I guess I'll also add our support for the 404 option, since that's kind of what we do by default anyway. If we haven't created something from a route, we will just serve a 404 by default to any request. And like 503s is kind of our default right now. We have like are looking for endpoints but could not find any, which I think makes sense because like, if you have a 503, like because of a misconfiguration, like you specified a backend ref that doesn't exist, like it's not temporarily unavailable, it's unavailable until that backend ref is actually created. Whereas with the endpoint case, you can like kind of reasonably assume that like probably a deployment is like coming up to or provide endpoints to satisfy that service.
Yeah, it's a good point about the transient nature of the error versus the 404. That's a good guideline, I think, to use here, that transient errors should probably be a server error rather than, whereas persistent errors that require human intervention to fix make more sense to be a 400 series error, 404.
This has been a very helpful discussion. Thank you. Before we move on from this topic, I want to make sure I understand the consensus here. It seems like we're fine with the 404 for the use cases I initially introduced, which are route can't be attached, or a backend ref refers to a non-existent or invalid service, or some other thing that it can't be resolved. But we also need to differentiate from that what happens when the service is valid, that reference is valid, but it goes to something that doesn't have endpoints. Does that sound good? Cool. Okay, I'll follow up on this one. I'll leave this comment for my own memory, and then I'll ping reviewers once I've updated this again. Cool.
Yeah, there was one question in the chat from Mikhail about what if a backend ref is valid but not supported? And so I think not supported makes it invalid. So if you refer to some CRD that the implementation that you are using doesn't support, that makes the backend ref invalid. Like, the present, it exists, the reference is valid, but the backend ref itself is not valid because it's not a supported group and kind. So that maybe that's another thing to keep in mind there too.
Adding another note for myself.
Yep. Always good to take notes, man.
Cool.
Yeah. I think as Mike says, that's a general guideline. If something is not supported, it's basically the same as if it's not attached. It may be present, but it should never attach. And so that I actually talked in one of the status things about adding a general condition that said something in your config is not supported, so that you can look for that one for that exact reason.
Great. Okay, let me move on to the next one on the list, which is conformance test added by Katarzyna, and the test matches the spec perfectly, and I think it's valid. Whatever. I just wanted to raise this by because when I looked at the test, it threw me off for a second, and that is that the test specifies and requires that /2 should match, but the trailing slash modifies that behavior. That is something we've explicitly, for prefix match, we've explicitly said that trailing slash makes no difference in terms of behavior. And exact match, we're saying actually it does make a difference. The trailing slash is meaningful. I think that makes sense. I've looked through a variety of implementations. This seems to be implementable at least, but not always default behavior. So I called out with Nginx, for example, this is something that does not happen by default. So you'd have to do some extra work to make this happen. I think this makes sense. I just want to make sure that someone else, that we all see this and we all agree that this logic of the trailing slash being a meaningful part of an exact match is what we want. Any thoughts on this one?
I believe this was also the case for Ingress v1 as well. So like I remember Nginx and Kong basically having the same sort of thing where like that is not our default behavior. And in our case, we have to change it to a regex that explicitly terminates after. So it's in that respect, probably something that people implementing this have maybe come across before if they're already familiar with Ingress. So, and also I guess from a user perspective, changing that from the way that Ingress handled exact path would be a bit odd.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm +1 from contour side and from sort of general principle side too.
I don't know that we don't have work to go do for this, but it makes conceptual sense.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna let this PR go through then. It looks good to me and it matches the spec as we defined it. This one specific issue, I just wanted to make sure everyone was okay with, but great. Glad that was straightforward. Bowie, were you?
I just said that like people running the conformance on their implementation will probably file an issue. So if anyone had an issue, it'll come back anyways.
Yeah. The next one, this is I don't think this is controversial. I was trying to think through any unintended consequences this change could have. I forget who made this initial change, but we added some tests that basically ensured that for conformance test to pass, you need 3 consecutive successful requests to a given endpoint. And it also added some level of, you know, it can fail this many times, but we need 3 successful requests in this time period that are concurrent. John's suggestion here is to take that one step further and say, if your previous request was successful, don't wait 1 second to send another request, just to speed up conformance test runs if everything's passing. This makes sense to me. It had me thinking, okay, maybe this is going to miss some edge case somewhere. I don't have a compelling enough use case there. And I think if it misses an edge case, that's a failure in our test, not a failure in the system. But just because it is a significant behavioral change, I wanted to, again, get a few more eyes on this and see if anyone was hesitant about getting this one in.
I added the eventual consistency stuff, and this makes sense to me. I'll go take a look at the PR.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, conceptually it makes sense to me too, but I haven't had a chance to look at anything for a while. So
I agree. It makes sense. It will save us all time on running conformance tests.
Awesome. Okay.
I see that there was a question from you, Mike, about the end user expectations. Was that a question about the path matching?
Yeah, that was for the exact match thing. So like not the difficulty of implementing it in the proxy, but users of each of our implementations, what they might expect. And that was kind of already addressed by people probably file issues about it.
Yeah, awesome. No worries. Thanks. I just wanted to check that we hit everything.
Cool. All right, I wanted to spend some time going through the O50 milestone. This is something that was previously called the V1 Beta 1 milestone, which this release will still include beta resources, but I thought it was clear to just label it the Semver release version. So I renamed this milestone. I think what we really need here is some cleanup of the things that are still in here. I think it may be safer now to move individual individual issues into the milestone and move this parent issue out.
Agreed.
Okay. Nick, can you follow up on this one? Awesome. Cool. I think this is the same. This is a like kind of a umbrella issue, and I'm not sure everything we've accomplished half of the things in here, or 2/3 of the things in here, and we are missing one of the things. I think what's best, I think the thing that's remaining is this one right here, move significant content generic to a resource into the resource description field. Mike, are you on this call?
Yeah, I'm here. It's a pretty big docs refactor. That's what it is.
Yeah, I think that specific thing is not critical to me for V1 alpha, sorry, for V050. And since the
Agreed.
rest of the things have been accomplished here, I think I'm good to pull this out of the milestone. Does that sound fair?
Yep, sounds good to me.
Okay. Cool.
I just created a VO60 milestone as well, Rob. So if you want to put these things in VO60 instead of like not having them, just having them vanish.
Great. Thank you. All right. And let's see, moving down the list. I need to document this, but this is blocked on this. I really wish we had, maybe there is a way, I'm just not good at GitHub, but maybe there's a way to say this issue blocks this issue, but whatever. This is all blocked by this refactor. I would love to get this refactor in sooner than later. I realize I need to respond to this comment. But if anyone else has time to take a look at this, this is a relatively large change that kind of came out of the SIG network API review and some comments there. We've already covered that in, I think, a previous meeting, but just this is, I think, probably the most significant change that is currently blocking release. And I would love to get this one in this week, if at all possible. So this may just be a lazy consensus one of, we do have one LGTM on there, so I will try to make the one change here. But otherwise, if there's no comments or anything, I'll just get one more LGTM and call it good. Okay.
Yeah, so with that one, I just wanted to call out to everyone here that it is important, I think, for us to remember that queue builder API server validation types, the upstream conventions say, hey, changing that validation is a breaking change because an enum implies that it's a closed set. And they sort of say, hey, we recommend if you're going to have this thing be an open set, and make sure you call it out where you have the enum validation, so that you're in the documentation for that, so that implementers know that this is an open set and could be added to at some point in the future. So you need to make sure there's a default case, right? Like, even if that default case is, hey, chief, I don't know what to do, you need to make sure that you don't just crash or something. Yeah, so I think that's, I'm trying to be the stickler for that sort of stuff, because I feel like there's so much pain written into that API conventions document that we really just want to try and avoid as much as possible.
Yeah, good catch. And I think we have that throughout the API in different places, but we need to, we have like this high level guidance in version in our versioning guidelines that say, hey, we can change this, but it would be much better to have it beside every field where it can change, just so it's crystal clear that the thing you're looking at can change in the future.
Yeah, I think that is also a great, first time you want to interact with the spec kind of thing is go through the spec, look for all instances where we've used the enum and directive, and just check to see that we have some call out there to say this is not closed, we can add to it later. Because I think pretty much everywhere we have used it, we want to be able to do that.
Yeah, great.
Oh, since I've got most of my engineers on here, I'm going to ask them to take a look at that PR and give you some feedback.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, I think it'd be really great if we can get the VO50 out before KubeCon, so that when we're talking about it, we can be like, this thing is now beta.
It's going to be really close. I would love to get it out. I want to have it as close to releasable as possible.
Agreed.
Our slides right now are very guarded of, we're talking about, we're releasing via beta, unclear of if it has happened quite yet or if it's, but I expect it to happen this month, and sooner the better. And these are really, I think, just the last little nitpicks that we're working through right now. So yeah, I'd love to get it in.
But this is not a thing we can rush. Like, we have to hit these nitpicks, because most of these things are stuff where we can't change them without API ref once we go back.
Yeah. So there's one other big one around status, and this has gone through a few different people that have been interested, but it's such a big one. And I'm realizing after the fact, like Shane was interested in a portion of it, but I think the full scale of this issue was a bit more than you had time for. So maybe what we need on this one too is to split this up into some smaller individual issues that different people can take on. I'm not sure the best way to split this one up. But Shane, remind me, Shane, you're on the, yeah, which specific part were you were talking about an accepted condition? Or
yeah, there's a PR 1114 actually ended up giving us what we ended up needing.
oh,
It's changed to, go ahead.
Maybe not quite. There was like an extra thing that I had originally tried to shove into 1114 that didn't actually go there, and I wasn't sure if like the change proposed here would make it so that it was like difficult to shove my thing in. But it was like a accepted false reason that we needed. It's still not there, but like accepted itself is there.
Oh yeah, 1114 was just kind of like introducing the first few because we didn't have any route reasons yet. So what was the specific accepted false reason that we were looking for?
Related to like namespace and port restrictions. So like on a gateway, you can say, I only allow routes to connect if they're from this namespace or these ports or whatever. And right, our implementation currently like will block that, but just log inside of the controller. And we were looking for basically better ways to tell the end user, nope, that route didn't work, but here's the reason.
Yep, that totally makes sense as a valid use case. Is there, do you have that separated initially yet?
I couldn't hear because of the dog.
Sorry, do you have that separately as an issue somewhere yet?
Travis, you wrote some stuff down about this somewhere, didn't you?
Yeah, I was just fetching the link. So that was the thing that I wanted to add for like when it doesn't match like the allowed routes criteria. So like that part pretty much doesn't change. I've basically been held up on like trying to write the conformance test or finding time to do that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, this was your proposal, and that looked good to both me and Rob. I believe we took a look at it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would recommend make a PR for that one. That will close out that specific action item. I think with these reasons and types and stuff, I think it's more important that we get the reasons and types into the spec now, then like we can do follow-up PRs for the conformance testing for it.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, like I think that the conformance tests, although like we got to have them for GA, like we don't need any more conformance coverage than we have already, I don't think, to be able to call these things beta. And so having the reasons and stuff in the spec is a blocker for beta, but having the conformance test is not.
I think from what I recall in conversations with Heather, Nick, and Rob, that we also talked about this is potentially a like easily extensible part of the spec where like if stuff doesn't get in for beta, that we can always add more reasons later.
Yeah, it doesn't. This is not a. Does not require adding reasons and condition types. Does not require API rev. It'll require bundle rev and stuff like that, but not an API rev. And a tour through the experimental channel, but not an API rev.
Yep. Okay, thank you for going through that. So Travis, are you going to create a PR to the main repo with this?
Yeah, if we don't need the conformance test immediately, then I'll just go ahead and resubmit this one to main.
That would be awesome. And then I can work with Mike to try and understand which of these things have already been done, which of them have not been done yet, and maybe we can split this out into a few smaller issues for the things that we still want to get in. And some of these, I think, since I think we do have consensus on this. I think each individual thing can be spec'd out clearly enough that this can be kind of a good first issue kind of thing where new contributors can jump in if you're interested. So again, keep an eye on this. I added, I think we have a few issues currently tagged good first issue. So if you have time and you're wanting to contribute to this API, we do have some issues that are good starting points now, and this could add a few more.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll work with you to break this up. And there's at least probably 4 separate individual issues that can come out of here. And I think the more important ones are the ones that are removing or changing existing reasons before we go to beta or something like that. The ones that are adding more verbose or informative reasons, I think those can easily be deferred to whenever.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect, right? It'll help us differentiate which ones belong in the milestone and which ones are nice to have but not required.
Yep, agreed.
Cool.
Sounds good.
All right, I'll follow up after. Thanks again for adding that issue. This one we already covered, the refactor. Domain prefix strings for named address. Nick, I remember you added this to the milestone.
I did, yeah. So I added it to the milestone because this is there's a bit of a change of type for the strings for named address. So yeah, I put some deliverables down the bottom because Meha asked if she could take this one. I wanted to talk about whether we think this is a breaking change. So right now there's a named address type that in like when we're talking about addresses that covers like what similar thing to what the load balancer status thing in ingress and service does for named address. So it covers like something that is not specifically an IP address. Could be an IP address, but could be a host name or some other thing. I wanted to make sure that we add the capability in here to have a domain prefix string. So we could have like projectcontour.io/special named address or something like that, right? Like some other condition type that has a domain prefix that is allowed through the validation hole. That means that then, because the named address behavior is very unclear and very implementation specific, this way we have a way for implementations to actually say, I want this as an address, then this is my address, and this and that way we can do the normal thing that we want to be able to do, which is to take what individual implementations do, get some consensus around what the right way to handle that thing is, and then make that into an official sort of type or something like that. And so that's the so currently this value is a string, and it has a validation that is like camel case only, and so I think, or domain name only or something like that. This is just saying like, hey, let's make sure that the validation allows slashes through so that you can do a domain prefix string.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Let me think about that. I agree that our named address idea, it's something that is going to have different meaning to everyone, which it's maybe not the best thing to use the same name or the same value to represent something that means different things to every implementation. A domain prefix path is something that is consistent with what we've done elsewhere in the API. This feels like something that is nice to have in a beta, like in this release. I don't know. It feels like something that we could cut if we had to.
So the only reason I will put it in here is that currently the address type actually has an enum validation, and so if we're changing the enum validation to non-enum validation, it's kind of technically is a validation change, which technically should be an API bump. I think in this case it's probably okay because we're not changing the underlying type, and the previous values will be allowed. So like the enum values will be allowed constants once we change this. And then we'll supply constants to actually do that. So I think, it probably is okay to push it out to later in this specific case, but we just need to be really careful about things where we're removing an enum and changing it to a pattern or something like that in the future. and think about it very carefully before we count it as not a breaking change.
This seems very closely related to the discussion earlier in this meeting about everywhere we have enum validation, we need to be very clear that this is open and we can and likely will loosen this validation in the future. So I view, even though the implementation details here are going to be, this moves from enum validation to regex validation or something like that, the UX for the user is the same thing of, I had 2 possible values and now I have n, 2 plus n possible values. So I think the fundamental pattern is the same as loosening enum validation. But I agree, at a minimum, we need that text saying, hey, this is coming. We're going to add more supported values here.
Yeah, so I think if someone can do that enum change, then I'm fine with taking this out, because that will cover the fact that we might change this later. I do. Since most of the implementers are on this call, I do think please just keep that in mind, that that the enums are not exhaustive.
Cool. All right, I think that exhausts everything that we have left in the O50 milestone. Good to see our percentage going up here, and hopefully we can get the last few of these knocked out pretty quickly. Again, I am still hoping for a KubeCon release for O50, but even if we don't get that specific date, I think it's going to be awfully soon. So, yeah. Okay, I think there's a couple extra items. Travis, you had one about TLS route.
Yeah, so convenient timing. I found this right before this meeting started. So looking for like our implementation of TLS route, how we assign certificates and like the TLS mode. Certificates definitely have like the get that says like, no, these aren't on, the TLS route itself, like they were in ingress, they're in the gateway, here's the reasons why. But then you get the host name, which seems kind of like maybe the only way to bind a TLS route to a specific listener. And there's only one of those, whereas TLS routes themselves and the certificates, now that they're multiple, can have many host names. And it wasn't quite clear, like, how are you supposed to do that binding? Like, and also if you want to have like, you just want to aggregate all your pass-through TLS routes together, do you have to create a listener separately for each of those? It didn't seem like this had come up before in chat, so I just kind of wanted to ask about it for, other implementers, or if people had thoughts about it or encountered the same thing.
Yeah, I think my expectation was definitely that because the reason we didn't want to do this was that if you have multiple host names on the listener, and you have multiple the multiple host names on the TLS route, and you have multiple certificates, it's very difficult. It becomes very difficult to like make sure that everything lines up. Like to make sure that they all match, or that only some of them match, or something like that. And so having a place where there's only one of them makes that easier. I do acknowledge that it means that you have to create separate listeners for like separate listener stanzas for each host name. I think at the end of the day, that's actually desirable, because then you can, then it makes it much easier to attach the TLS route to only the listener, because they have to be named, and you can attach things to only a single host name. That was kind of my reasoning, I think, originally for doing this, was we had problems with multiple host names, multiple certificate references in Control when we're trying to do it for Ingress v1.
This may be just a bit of misconfiguration, but then if you have like a TLS route with foo.example and bar.example, and then separate listeners for foo.example and bar.example, you just like essentially, apply the TLS route to both, where in our case, we just get multiple representations of similar route, or?
Yeah, so the way that the host name matching works is, as long as there's a match between a host name on the gateway and a host name on the route, then you're good.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we actually talked about adding the host names that are actually matched into the status of the route, so that you can tell which, like when you attach to a listener, which route you get, like which host name you match to. I don't know if that actually happened yet, but we did definitely talk about it.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like totally valid use case for like staging in production or something like that, that you're binding the same route to like multiple different listeners.
Yeah, like I also considered like the cheating method, where you just want to aggregate all of your pass-through routes together, and you just create a fake host name that won't actually be used and just put it on all of them. I don't know if that's an intended effect here, but it seems like it would work.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you pass the hostname validation, then I'm sure. Like, I think the we have to walk such a fine line here to hit the use case of the sort of cluster admin really wants to keep tight control of the of what host names go where, and the magic use case of hey, I can just do everything I need to quickly and easily. So so this was the best that I could come up with, that also dodged the bullet that we had to hit with Contour about we found writing the tests for what happens if only like in Ingress the behavior was not specified. If you have like a host name and a certificate, they're both lists, and if you don't, and how do you check that they all need to match? Only some, like none of that behavior was specified. I think we could do it better here because we've specified what the behavior should be for the host name matching. But I think that having multiple host names in a single listener, although it will be convenient, will also make it much harder to test some of these things, because then you've got a three-dimensional intersection. Like you've got hostname listener, route listener, plus S9 listener. So, and I think that's that in my mind, that's the main reason, just to leave it at a single one. I should say as well that it also, I think we still don't document this very well, but it also is intended that if you allow your implementation to support merging gateways, that having separate listeners in separate gateways should be equivalent to having those same listeners in a single gateway object. Right? That's what gateway merging is intended to be. You should be able to break those up into separate gateways if that's the way you want things, or have like a bunch of listeners in one gateway. Does that make sense, Travis?
Yeah, I think that I think I'm going to encounter more like problems to solve in our implementation down the road. But now I at least know, it is intentional and what the reasons why are. So.
Yeah, cool. If you can think of anywhere where we should write that down so that other people don't have to ask the same question, then please feel free to make a suggestion. This is a classic case of stuff that's in my head or Rob's head that's there for historical reasons where it just hasn't been written down.
Yeah, so you got writing something for it, probably a bit further on through my implementation, because it'll help me understand it better. But
yeah, no problem.
Yeah, good conversation and good answers, Nick. I think we've tried just about every possible combination of port, host name, and like, do you have multiple ports per host name, per protocol? Anyway, and we ended up with gateway listener as it is right now, where the idea is port protocol. Each combination of port protocol and host name is intended to be unique within the gateway. I recognize that there are flaws in each of these. Hopefully this is the most straightforward of the possible options, but I know that each has its unfortunate downsides. Interested in, yes, better ways to document, and also if there are tweaks to our approach or documentation that could help. But yeah, thanks for raising that. Carlicia, I think, how can we help?
Yeah, so I was in the meeting last week and we were talking about the HTTP route conditions and status. And you all asked someone to open a new ticket, and I volunteered. And I thought, and the reason why I'm asking is because I thought it was the ticket was supposed to be for just to extract like the actual readiness portion of that ticket. But now I'm not so certain. And also the issue number 1111 that you displayed just a few minutes ago, that's basically it. So I'm thinking, if it was something else, I misunderstood. So be glad to open the ticket if somebody can remind me what it actually was.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said the magic word ready, and I think that reminded me. I think the key was that we wanted to extract the discussion about what does ready mean. Yeah, and so
Oh.
that's mentioned on the quad 1 issue, but we need to have a specific issue for us to talk about. Do we have a ready condition? Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So that. Mhm.
yeah, it's like the issue title should be like consider adding a ready condition everywhere. And the discussion is then about should we add a ready condition anywhere? It can be hard for implementations to. And what does a ready condition mean? Like it means that this is guaranteed to be finished, that the eventual consistency has eventuated, and like that this is finished, and that is the implication. And so like if your implementation can't do that, then what can you do? Like is there some other way, some other condition that we can say that we talked about, configured or programmed or something like that? That's like, hey, I've done everything I can do. Now I got to wait. Now you got to just probe and see what happens. This has come up a lot because Knative, that needs to be sure that everything is fully configured in its data path before it starts sending things. But Knative's like sort of duty cycle is a lot shorter than the sort of wall clock time that we usually care about. Like usually for users, you're making a change once. And then like if it takes 10 seconds, that is not a big deal, right? Like, you've made the change, you wait 10 seconds, it's all good, fine. Whereas for Knative, because they're constantly spinning up and spinning down and, scaling to 0 and stuff like that, those few seconds can be crucial. And so like, it's important for the way the Knative works to be able to be 100% sure that, that everything is good. And so I think that's obviously you work on Knative, so you know what I'm talking about, but that's where the ready requirement that Evan has been talking about on a few issues has come from, is that right now Knative has a whole bunch of custom probing logic that will probe through the data path to 100% confirm that everything is good. And so we need a way to signal this is definitely 100% configured, and that's what the ready contract kind of implies.
Got it. All right, thanks, Nick. And so there is that issue named discrepancies between accepted, ready, detached, condition types, and reasons. It is pretty long, so I just want to make sure that issue, when it comes to the route condition type, which I think we're talking about specifically just the HTTP routes, right?
So I think this could apply to all route types. Good. Yeah, this is a really good discussion. And I think so earlier in the meeting, Mike and I agreed to go through this issue and split up things into different follow-up issues because it is a massive issue. I think if you want to specifically take this and move it into a different issue, we can just link that off to whatever issue you create. And then the other ones we may be able to group in other ways. But I think the idea of ready is much larger than many of the other bullet points and much less known or understood at this point. So an issue just for that, I think, would make sense.
All right, that makes sense to me. Thank you. I would do it right now.
Yeah, cool. No worries. Again, not taking notes. One of us not writing that down immediately strikes again. So yeah, we all got to remember. That's on me too.
Yep. Okay, well, I think we made it to the end of our agenda. I guess we've got a few minutes. Does anyone have anything else we should discuss? Silence is good. I guess we can have our time back.
Do you guys want to advertise your session at KubeCon? When is it?
Yes. Let's come back to that. Nick and I think others on this call will be at KubeCon next week in Valencia. If you're there, we'd love to meet you. I think we'll both be at the Contributor Summit on Monday. And then we're giving a update talk on Thursday, 5 something. I can't remember,
it's
but
late. It's later
late.
on in the day.
Yeah. But I think we're the last talk of the day, or in the last slot of the day. So we'll probably just meet up after. And I don't know that there's anything formal organized, but because we're the last session of the day, it means we can continue talking however long, wherever makes sense. So yeah, we would love to see people that are at KubeCon. And if not, we'll follow up. I think for anyone that missed the beginning of this meeting, we're planning on canceling the next 2 Gateway API meeting. So we'll meet back in 3 weeks from now on Zoom. And hopefully we'll see some of you in person in Valencia.
Indeed. And as always, if you have questions before then, Slack channel is always there. You know, I'll be checking that while I'm in KubeCon intermittently. So yeah, if you need to ask things until then, of Rob or I, then bring us individually or put it in the channel.
Safe travels, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
See ya.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.